Bangladesh, man. It's like this country down in South Asia, known as the Land of Bengal. It's got this rich history, with the British colonial rule and the mix of Hindu, Buddhist, and Islamic traditions all blending in. But here's the kicker: despite being pretty sizable, about 148,000 square kilometers, it's got this crazy high population density, like 169 million folks squeezed in there. To put it in perspective, it's like fitting 20 times the population of Ceará state in Brazil into that space. Now, that super-packed population, it's causing some serious strain on the resources, making Bangladesh deal with all sorts of issues tied to overcrowding. Sure, it's got these gorgeous tropical beaches and lush forests that make for stunning scenery, but visitors gotta brace themselves for stuff like loads of flies, especially in urban areas like Dhaka, the capital, where you've got like 23 million people hustling and bustling. And natural disasters? They're a real deal here. Earthquakes and floods, they're no strangers to Bangladesh. For travelers, that might be a worry. I mean, the idea of facing these disasters in a place where tens of thousands are affected each time, it's pretty daunting. It might make folks think twice before considering a trip there, Hey, if you're digging the content, don't forget to drop a like. All right, every week, we're rolling out top-notch videos just for you. All right, so let's talk about Bangladesh's society. It all started after the ancient Indian empires took a nosedive. Even though they've been leaning towards an Islamic culture since like the 12th century, they never really shook off their ties with India, because they were neighbors and all. Actually, up until 91, the region that became Bangladesh was split, with Muslims in the east and Indians in the west. Now, that division stuck around, bringing some hefty governance challenges. Despite efforts to patch things up and rebuild over the last 3 decades, Bangladesh keeps getting slammed by floods and earthquakes, making recovery a real pain. And oh boy, overcrowding? It's like the biggest roadblock to the country's progress, hands down. These days, Bengali's the official language there. But here's the kicker. Not many folks are fluent in English on the streets, And even if they speak it, they might have this unique accent going on, which could throw visitors off. Plus, the Bangladeshi government does all its official stuff and business dealings in English, rather than their native tongue. So now that we've given you the lowdown on Bangladesh, let's dive into what life's like over there. Bangladesh? It's like one of the most economically disadvantaged nations out there. Most folks are pulling in less than $5 a day, and when you take a look at what they're doing, it's clear a lot of them are doing some pretty basic jobs. The minimum wage? It's around $95. So, with the average income being crazy low, Bangladesh becomes this hotspot for cheap labor on a global scale. No wonder big corporations and international companies are all over it like bees to honey. I mean, if you're a big shot brand, you're probably eyeing up places with lower taxes and cheaper workforce to set up shop and churn out your products. Loads of big players are already playing this game. They've got factories set up in Bangladesh, pumping out stuff for their stores worldwide and selling them at way lower prices than what you'd pay for stuff made in the US, for example. In Bangladesh, a company can hire like 10 to 15 workers for the same cost. But hey, when you're strolling down the streets of Dhaka, the capital, it's pretty common to see folks, no matter the gender, lugging stuff on their heads. 'Cause you see, lack of access to vehicles means they gotta haul heavy loads like that. And oh, don't even get me started on the tangle of cables snaking through the streets, hooked up to poles, probably for phones and internet. It's not all that different from what you'd see in Brazil, This whole scene, man, it's like something straight out of the history books, giving off vibes like it's been going on for decades, showing the shabby infrastructure of the country. The traffic on Bangladesh's roads? It's like the busy streets you'd find in Vietnam or India, always packed with vehicles moving nonstop. Walking around carelessly? That's practically asking to get hit by a motorcycle or car, because there ain't no sidewalks or overpasses for pedestrians. Crossing the street? It's a whole adventure with all sorts of risks. Plus, you've got the constant honking and hustle and bustle that just never dies down. There ain't no traffic lights controlling the chaos, relying instead on the police to keep things in check. If you're someone who cherishes peace and can't stand constant noise, Bangladesh might drive you up the wall, because life there is a far cry from what's considered normal. Even on relatively quiet roads, those incessant horns can get under your skin and crank up the stress levels. Public transport. Well, you've got these old buses that are like 20 to 30 years past their prime. Seats? Forget about comfort. They're usually hard as rocks and always jam-packed. For urban transport, you've got these bicycle rickshaws, but sadly, they're powered solely by human effort, no engines in sight. It's kinda sad seeing mostly skinny dudes pedaling away, often carrying extra passengers, which must be exhausting and uncomfortable. They say there are like 30 million of these bikes in the country, and a lot of folks make a living as rickshaw cyclists. But that often leads to conflicts between cyclists or heated arguments between street vendors in the squares. The overcrowding, the near-constant chaos at every corner, and the challenging lifestyle. It's enough to put anyone on edge. When you're out and about exploring the cities and markets of Bangladesh, one thing you can't miss is the abundance of street stalls practically on every corner. Now, while they might be selling food and all, there's this nagging concern about the lack of proper hygiene at these stalls and the places they're set up, with some vendors not exactly shining in the personal hygiene department. This might make travelers think twice about chowing down on any grub or sipping on drinks in the country, because nobody wants to risk health issues, you know? And let's talk about education. It's seriously lacking here. Only about 3 out of 10 folks have basic reading and writing skills. And this low education level feeds into this kind of restricted cultural standard you see around. Plus, the cities, they're dealing with some serious pollution, and trash is everywhere you look across the whole country. And don't even get me started on the common sight of people spitting on the streets at every turn. It's like, you gotta put on this grateful attitude for the country no matter what the conditions are like. Oh, and another thing that can really mess with your vibe while traveling in Bangladesh? The excessive attention you get from people when you're out and about. No matter your gender, you might feel like you're constantly under some intrusive gaze, and it's not just about anything sexual, you know. It could signal some kind of interest in benefiting financially or in other ways. While some folks might just be curious to see a tourist, it's wise to keep your guard up, even when it comes to supposedly trustworthy tour guides. In a country where many work for measly wages, you gotta be aware that some might try to milk you for cash, one way or another. So, it's crucial to exercise caution in all your interactions and transactions. Once they clock you as a tourist, be ready to get hit with significantly higher prices for pretty much anything. And if you're rolling without a guide, watch out for attempts to take advantage of your lack of experience with the local market. Like, in restaurants, forget about regular menus. It's all open kitchens where you can see the grub being cooked. But when you ask about the price, it's often jacked up. Now, when you're visiting Bangladesh for a short stint, how should you handle things? Well, Bangladesh has got a bunch of temples and museums, showcasing architectures dating back to ancient empires and the nation's founders. But here's the deal. Admission to these museums usually ain't free, and they often charge tourists more than locals. And hey, you can even hop on boat rides like in Venice. Local folks take tourists on river tours in their own boats, earning some cash on the side. It's worth noting that in a country where prostitution might be tolerated, booze is a no-go due to social norms. Even though it's not exactly pricey, its availability is limited here, thanks to some social imbalances the country's dealing with. So, here's the deal. Booze isn't legally sold in shops in Bangladesh, so it's pretty much nowhere to be found. But hey, one cool thing is how affordable everything is. Like, you can fill up at a restaurant for about $10, which is like a steal. So yeah, living in Bangladesh is pretty sweet on the wallet, even though there's some debate about the health and hygiene standards. Another cool thing, when locals spot a foreigner, they're all about giving you a warm welcome and asking for selfies. It's a real ego boost, you know? And get this, Bangladesh has been consistently ranking among the top 5 fastest-growing economies in the world for years now. Economic experts reckon the country's on the fast track to getting richer, mainly because of its massive population. Lots of educated folks in Bangladesh share this belief, and when they meet tourists, They're all about singing the country's praises. But here's the flip side. In a nation with a whopping 169 million people, tons of folks are struggling to get by. Unofficial estimates suggest nearly 5 million individuals are living on the streets, facing the harsh reality of homelessness. Reintegrating this significant portion of the population into society and helping them become productive members is a major challenge for the country. Even those who have a home often live in dire conditions, dwelling in makeshift areas that can hardly be called slums. Their homes often lack walls and basic sanitation facilities like toilets and showers. To survive, many rely on discarded food found on the streets or thrown away in markets, sharing these scarce resources with their families. Those without financial means resort to makeshift modes of transportation, like hopping onto moving trains, risking their lives by hanging onto the train cars or attempting to climb in through the windows. In many parts of the country, the landscape resembles that of a nation emerging from armed conflict. It's intriguing, yet not surprising, that a small elite in Bangladesh enjoys a luxurious quality of life, while the majority of the population lives in poverty. There's a sense that this elite is exploiting the country's limited wealth at the expense of the vast majority. Bangladesh consistently ranks as one of the worst countries to live in, facing significant challenges due to high population density and widespread poverty, which hinders sustainable development. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you liked it, don't forget to drop a like.